Last year I bought you some film of the Kinetic Wood-splitter that I purchased, and as I've now had it over a year and I'm using it into the second season, I thought I'd bring you a bit of an update as to how it's going and how it performs. So today I've got this log here to chainsaw up and split. Now, as you can see, this log is going to be pretty challenging. It's got heaps and heaps of limbs coming out of it, and it's the sort of thing that you'd really regard as a nightmare if you were splitting by hand. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the splitter handles it. Judging from the timber that I've put through already, these will present some challenge, but not an insurmountable one. But anyway, I'll cut this up and we'll take it over to the splitter and see how it goes. So the first basic problem with these rounds is that they're just so large. It makes them really hard to work with. Smaller rounds are far more desirable and much easier. However, with a bit of effort, you can work with these, and as you can see, where the grain is reasonably straight, it's splitting through without too much trouble. My usual working practice is to push the material that I'm waiting on to the back, and as you can see, then work through a piece, getting it out of the road. Now, this particular timber is a little more green than I usually work with. That makes it a bit tougher and a bit heavier. But this section is breaking up quite easily. Now this piece has got some cross grain in, but it's not the worst piece. But there is a limb there, and as you can see, it's a little bit inclined to jump away from that. Completely jumped out that time. Always best to work this way where you're entering from the easy end and then you can get in and start breaking it up. Now that's a bit hard to work with, so better to burn it. It's small enough to go in. Now this one's big, heavy, and lots of branches coming out of it, so it's going to be quite a challenge. A couple of hits went through and broke it down, but this is pretty solid and not going easily. Now realistically, you don't want to work with timber that is this tough with this machine. If you did this all the time, you're probably going to damage it in the end. And most of the timber that I work with isn't like this. It's much easier and smoother. It's only the occasional head log that's got the branches coming off that I split, that's like this. Because working with timber like this is a lot slower too. As you can see, I'm wasting a lot more time trying to split it. But all timber burns, and some of this tight grain stuff burns the longest, and so I do try and recover it if I can. Now this one's bouncing around quite a lot because it's simply hard to get an angle where I can get the push. Now what you don't experience is the fact that when it locks up like this does, I can smell the belt. There's belt slip happening on the flywheel, and it very quickly you start to smell it. I'd much rather have that belt slip and experience that and wear out a belt than to break something mechanical. Belts are much easier to replace. Some of these other parts may have to come from the factory in China, and that could take quite a while if you could actually even get them. So again, this bit is just way too tough, but finally breaks through. Now, sometimes you see there it actually cuts through part of the grain, and I'm attempting to do this here, is to actually cut through the grain like an axe, because I did sharpen the splitting bar, and it's reasonably sharp, and with a bit of a drive it'll go through just like an axe and chop some of that grain. And you can see it's done that on this one. But this is pretty tough stuff. Realistically, like if you were splitting this by hand, you simply would give up and get the chainsaw out and try and cut it up with the chainsaw. This is a very difficult piece to work with because there's not a lot of flat material that I can hit against with the splitter, so it tends to be jumping out, and where I'm trying to get in, got a little piece off there, but just not giving me good advantage. Not wanting to sit properly either. angle on this limb cut is not right. So while that limb would actually split if you could get a hit on it, the angle just makes it too difficult to do that. So I finally just gave up on that piece. Too hard. But that was the only piece I gave up on. The rest of it split eventually. It's jammed pretty solid, and I've hit it too many times. But now you can see a little split appear, so keep going and it'll break through. Now, a lot of people suggest removing the safety lever on this so that it only requires one hand to operate rather than two. But personally, it really isn't worthwhile doing that. The risk factor of making a mistake and getting your hand in the wrong place is just too great. It would be too serious an injury. It's much better to have that safety feature on it. I know quite a lot of the older machines were made so that they would operate one-handed, but having the two hands, knowing that your hands are out of the road, I really think it's a good idea. Because the speed that this operates, you haven't got any time to correct an error. This one's proving a little bit difficult, not wanting to give up, but just keep working at it. You can't quite see with the video as well as you can in reality, but there's an angle on that cut, and that's why it's wanting to jump. It's not a square cut, so it's not being easy. It's wanting to stay there. It just wants to jump out. Now you can see the angle better, but finally get it. So, a real example of the importance of a good straight cut. Now this is jammed because it went sideways, and just hitting the lever a second time usually allows it to bounce back. Yes, I would sometimes like a little bit larger working bed, a bit more space to sit material on that I'm not working. Having the tractor there and its platform is good, but the hydraulics let it down slowly, and so I have to start with it positioned a little bit higher, and then it eventually comes down to the level that I want. If I started it at a straight level, it'd end up being too low. The way around that, of course, is that I could establish a support mechanism for it so that it doesn't drop. I just haven't found the time to do that. I'm hitting it repeated times because it's jammed, it's not retracting, and the only way out of that is just to keep on giving it an extra hit until it bounces out. It's interesting that when you get a branch from that angle, that it splits very easily, whereas you wouldn't expect it. But of course, like this, it's going to be a lot tougher, and basically is then cutting for it rather than splitting it. But this is an example of the power of it. It is actually just chopping straight through this timber and working like an axe. So they were the two toughest rounds. The other rounds were reasonably good, even though sometimes you might have a little bit of a branch, the rest of it went fairly smoothly. Only the difficulty of working with the size of the log. And as you can see, it's so much faster working with the straight grained timber. You're able to produce firewood much quicker and in greater volume. Well, those first two rounds were quite challenging, and there was just the one piece that I gave up on. So basically, second season in and having hit it with some fairly challenging material, I'm quite happy with this splitter. I have learned a couple of things about it. Number one, of course, is that you need to oil this bar, and you need to do it reasonably frequently. I do it probably a lot more frequently than they recommend, but I think the less wear here, the better, and the longer the life is going to be. The second thing is at the point where this bar operates, it needs to be lubricated regularly as well. Every time you do that, you need to actually put some oil in here. If you saw the unpacking video, you would have seen that it came with this oil can, and it needs to be injected there where it is spinning and the lever comes from, as I say, quite regularly. If this lever is getting tight at all, I found it's time to put more oil on that. There's nothing that's going to lubricate that area and the action of the lever other than applying oil with this oil can. The only thing I've had break with it, which was actually late last season, was the top of this piece here. It comes off, it's just a metal bar, and the top of it actually snapped off with the force of your hand hitting it. And look, I got this replacement under warranty, but I expect that will probably go again, and it's just not quite strong enough for the continual, got some air under it, for the continual impact that your hand has on it. And I think, you know, I'm going to have to find another option for that when it breaks next time. But as I say, all in all, I'm really happy with it. And for most of the timber that I do, it's really, really easy and quick. Thanks for watching. Hope you found this video useful. If you did, please like, subscribe if you haven't already, and share.